Before cities, before kings, before borders or flags, or gods carved into stone. Human beings were already killing each other. Not in the way history class taught you. Not with cannon fire or cavalry charges or generals standing on hills pointing at maps. No, this was something far older, far darker, and far more unsettling, because it tells us something about ourselves that most of us would rather not hear. There is a gravesite in Sudan. It sits on the edge of the Nile, in a place now called Jebel Sahaba. Archaeologists opened it up in the 1960s and found something that stopped them cold. 61 bodies, men, women, and children. And almost every single one of them had been killed violently. Arrowheads lodged in spines, stone blades embedded in skulls. Healed wounds on top of fresh wounds, meaning these people had been attacked before. They survived once, and then they didn't. This gravesite is 13,000 years old. That's not a war you'll find in any history book. There's no name for it, no empire behind it, no ideology and no record at all, except for bones in the sand telling a story that no one wrote down. And yet, it happened. So the real question isn't when was the first war in human history. The real question is, why did it happen at all? And when you find that answer, it changes the way you see everything, every war, every conflict and every act of violence in human history, right up to today. Let's go back, all the way back. Before war, the world that existed. To understand the first war, you have to first understand the world that existed before it. For most of human history, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small, nomadic bands. Groups of maybe 20 to 50 people. Extended families, essentially. They moved constantly, following animals, following seasons, following food. These people were hunter-gatherers. And for a long time, historians and anthropologists assumed that meant they were peaceful. The idea was almost romantic, noble people living in harmony with nature, no concept of territory, no reason to fight. Rousseau called it the state of nature. He imagined early humans as fundamentally gentle, innocent, and uncorrupted. That picture is almost entirely wrong. But here's what's interesting, it's also not entirely right to say our ancestors were constantly at war either. The truth is messier, more human. When groups were small and land was vast, conflict was mostly personal. A dispute over a woman. A stolen kill. An insult that drew blood. Violence existed, but it was intimate. It was between individuals, or small groups, and it rarely lasted long. You couldn't afford a sustained fight when your entire survival depended on every single person in your band being alive and functional. And there was always an escape valve. You could just leave, move on or go somewhere else. The world was enormous, populations were tiny. If tensions rose, you walked away, simple as that. But then something happened that took that option away. Around 15,000 to 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age began to retreat, the climate of the planet started shifting. The glacier pulled back, forests spread, and rivers filled. Certain regions of the Earth became extraordinarily rich, lush with game, thick with fish, heavy with wild grain. And humans noticed. Specifically, humans began to stay. In places like the Fertile Crescent, modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Israel, and along the Nile in Africa, people began to linger longer in one place. Why roam when the food comes to you? Why chase the herd when the valley feeds you every single season? This is the moment historians call the beginning of sedentism. The beginning of settling down. And it changed everything. Because here's the brutal mathematics of it. When you settle, you accumulate. You store food, you build shelters, you claim land, and you invest your entire existence into a specific patch of earth. And when you invest everything into one place, you have something to lose. And the moment humans had something to lose, the psychology of violence shifted completely. Now, walking away wasn't an option anymore. Now, if a rival group showed up near your valley, the valley your grandparents helped build, the valley your children were born in, the equation was completely different. You didn't leave. You fought. The evidence, what the bones tell you us. Let's talk about what we actually know. Not theory, not guesswork. what the physical evidence tells us. Because for most of the 20th century, the debate about prehistoric warfare was almost purely philosophical. Scholars argued about it endlessly. Were early humans violent or peaceful? Without much hard evidence to go on. Then the archaeologists started digging. And what they found was grim. Jebel Sahaba, Sudan, 13,000 years ago. This is the site that keeps coming up. And for good reason. It's one of the oldest known massacres in human history. The cemetery, officially known as Site 117, was excavated by a team led by Fred Wendorf in the 1960s along the Nubian stretch of the Nile. What they uncovered was unlike anything found before. Of the 61 individuals buried there, roughly 45% showed clear signs of violent death. Stone projectile points, the tips of arrows or spears, were found embedded inside the bodies. Not just near them, inside them. Lodged between ribs, pressed against vertebrae. In one case, driven into the base of a skull. Some of the wounds had healed, which means these people were attacked, survived, lived with their injuries, and then were attacked again and killed. But here's the detail that haunts researchers most. The victims included women, children, and the elderly. This wasn't a battle between warriors. This was a massacre, a systematic attack on an entire group. Who carried it out? We don't know. There's no way to know. But the evidence points to organized, repeated violence. Not a single spontaneous clash, but something sustained and deliberate. Reanalysis of the site in 2021 using modern techniques confirmed and expanded the original findings. This was not an anomaly. This was war. Number 1, Crow Creek, South Dakota, 1325 AD. Now jump forward, way forward, to North America. 1325 AD. Pre-contact, before Europeans arrived. At a site called Crow Creek in what is now South Dakota, archaeologists found a mass grave containing the remains of approximately 486 people, nearly the entire population of a village. Every single one had been killed, scalped, mutilated. Many had their hands and tongues cut out. The bodies showed signs of being left exposed before being gathered and buried together in a single mass grave. This is one of the largest prehistoric massacres ever found in North America. And it tells us something important. Organized, large-scale violence between communities is not a feature of civilization. It predates civilization. It appears across continents, across cultures, across thousands of years of separation. Number 2, Sparnschletz, Austria, 1500 BC. In Lower Austria, along the Danube, a Neolithic settlement was excavated that told yet another story of ancient horror. The settlement had been attacked. The bodies of at least 67 individuals were found in the ditches surrounding the village. The defensive ditches, ironically. They had been killed and left where they fell. Many showed fractures consistent with blows from stone axes. Several skulls had been caved in from behind, struck while fleeing or while already on the ground. What was most striking was what wasn't there, the remains of young women. Population analysis suggested that the adult women of childbearing age had been taken, abducted, not killed on sight. This is a pattern that appears over and over in the archaeology of prehistoric violence. Raids designed not just to kill, but to capture, to take resources, including people. What the pattern tells us. When you lay all of this evidence out, Jebel Sahaba, Crow Creek, Sparnschletz, and dozens of other sites from Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas, a pattern emerges. Prehistoric warfare wasn't random. It wasn't just angry individuals. It showed clear signs of, number 1, planning. Attacks often happened at dawn or when groups were vulnerable. Number 2, organization. Multiple attackers, coordinated action. Number 3, strategy. Villages were fortified. Ditches were dug. Walls were built, not for decoration, for defense. Number 4, repetition. Healed wounds on victims show these weren't isolated incidents. Violence was a recurring feature of life. This is war. It may not have had generals or supply lines or flags, but it is recognizably, undeniably war. And the question that follows is, why? The psychology, Why did humans start killing each other at scale? This is where it gets deeply uncomfortable. Because the answer isn't really about resources or territory or even survival. The answer is about something far more fundamental. It's about the way the human brain works when it perceives an us and a them. The trigger, scarcity. Let's go back to that climate shift we talked about. As regions became more productive and populations began to settle, something else was happening simultaneously. The climate was not perfectly stable. There were droughts, there were hard winters, and there were years when the fish didn't come and the grain didn't grow. And when scarcity hit a settled community, a community that had given up the nomadic flexibility that once allowed them to simply move on, the pressure became unbearable. Researchers studying the Jebel Sahaba massacre believe it occurred during a period of severe climatic stress along the Nile. The river's behavior was erratic. Resources that the population had come to depend on were fluctuating wildly. When people are desperate, they don't philosophize. They look at the group in the next valley, the group with food, with land, with stored grain, and they make a calculation. A terrible, logical calculation. The outgroup dynamic. Here's something that evolutionary psychologists have documented extensively. The human brain is exquisitely tuned to distinguish between members of our group and strangers. This isn't a cultural thing, it's biological. It's wired into us at a level that is almost impossible to override consciously. In small, isolated bands, this instinct was mostly harmless. You were loyal to your group. You were cautious around strangers. But strangers were rare, and encounters were brief. As populations grew and territories began to overlap, as the guy from the next valley started showing up near your fishing spot, that instinct didn't stay harmless anymore. Psychologists call it in-group favoritism and out-group derogation. We see our group as human, complex, and sympathetic. We see the other group as a threat, as less, as other. And once that mental switch flips, once another group is categorized not as unfamiliar people but as the enemy, the moral calculations change completely. Things that would be unthinkable within your own group become permissible, expected, even heroic. This is not ancient history. This is the same mechanism behind every genocide, every ethnic cleansing, every mob violence incident in recorded human history, right up to the present day. The technology changes, but the psychology doesn't. The role of leadership. There's one more ingredient that turns violence from occasional into systematic. And that's the emergence of leaders. In the most egalitarian hunter-gatherer societies, authority was fluid. Anyone who tried to dominate the group too aggressively was simply left behind, or ignored, or, in extreme cases, killed by the rest of the group. Anthropologists call this egalitarian enforcement. Early humans were intensely, almost aggressively anti-authoritarian. But as settlements grew, as food surpluses accumulated, as populations swelled, leadership became not just possible, but necessary. Someone had to coordinate the storage. Someone had to resolve disputes. Someone had to organize the defense of the village. And someone had to organize the attack. The first warlords weren't kings. They didn't wear crowns, but they were there. You can see them in the archaeological record. Burials with more weapons, more status objects, more evidence of a life devoted to violence and its direction. Once you have a leader who benefits personally from war, who gains status, resources, and power through successful raids, you've created an engine for conflict that feeds itself. It becomes self-sustaining. Attacking builds resources and status. Status attracts followers. Followers enable more attacks. And the neighboring group, watching this, does the exact same thing. It's an arms race as old as the first settled village. The first documented war, Sumer and the historical record. Now we need to draw a distinction. Everything we've discussed so far is prehistoric warfare, conflict that existed before writing, before records, known only through archaeology and physical evidence. The first war in recorded history is a different matter. And it takes us to one of the most extraordinary places on Earth, Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, modern-day Iraq, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Around 3000 BC, This region was home to humanity's first true civilization, Sumer. The Sumerians invented writing. They invented mathematics. They invented the wheel, the plow, the city. They built ziggurats that scraped the sky. They organized governments, courts, trade networks, and, inevitably, armies. And they wrote things down. The earliest known written account of warfare comes from around 2700 to 2500 BC. It involves two Sumerian city-states, Lagash and Umma. These two cities sat next to each other along the same river plain, separated by a fertile strip of land they both wanted. The dispute over this borderland, known as the Guiden, would spark what is considered the world's first recorded war. The conflict was not a single battle. It was a generational war. Multiple rounds of fighting, treaties signed and broken, invasions and counter-invasions, spanning over 150 years. The Stele of the Vultures, one of the oldest surviving war monuments, depicts the ruler of Lagash, Yanadam, leading his phalanx of soldiers into battle against Umma. It is breathtaking in its detail. Soldiers marching in tight formation behind a wall of shields. The dead of the enemy trampled underfoot. Vultures, the Stele's namesake, clutching the severed heads of fallen warriors in their talons. This is organized, state-sponsored warfare. This is what war looks like when cities get involved. But it is important to understand, this is not the beginning of warfare. It is the beginning of warfare that was written down. The violence at Jebel Sahaba happened 10,000 years before the Sumerian kings. The instinct, the pattern, the tragedy, all of it was already there. The Akkadian Empire and the first conqueror. Shortly after the Lagash-Umma conflict, another figure rose who would take warfare to an entirely new scale. His name was Sargon of Akkad. Born around 2334 BC, Sargon didn't just fight wars. He created the world's first empire through conquest. He united the Sumerian city-states by force and extended his reach from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, a territory that no single ruler had ever controlled before. Sargon is credited with creating the world's first professional standing army. Before him, armies were assembled for a specific campaign and then disbanded. Sargon kept his soldiers permanent, fed, housed, equipped, and loyal, not to a city, but to a king. This was a revolution in violence. An army that existed not to defend one city, but to project power anywhere, at any time. The inscription he left behind is remarkable in its arrogance and its precision. He claimed that 5,400 men ate at his table daily, a reference to his standing army. He boasted of 34 battles fought and won. He claimed the gods had given him the entire world. Whether or not the gods agreed, no one who saw his army showed up to argue.